Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. He is a blogger for ESPN 1500, along with Cold Omaha and numerous blogs around the internets. He is a useful human, and he is Arif Hassan. Arif, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well, man. It's my birthday, although by the time people will listen to this, my birthday will have passed.
So everyone can feel bad about not wishing you a happy birthday on your birthday, and we'll be wishing you something the day after.
Yeah, exactly. They should feel bad. If you just clicked my Twitter page, the balloons fly up. It's my birthday. If you don't know, that's your fault, obviously.
It is your fault, obviously. So welcome to the show. We got plenty of stuff to talk about. We have a fantastic game to go over for Carolina. We went into the home of the NFC champions and then punched the MVP of the league right square in the face. That is the equivalent of what we did in Carolina on Sunday. So we got plenty of stuff to talk about.
Not even really metaphorical, honestly.
I mean, we just beat the hell out of them. There was a point at which I was sitting there Cam Newton almost pulled off Eli Manning face. Like right at that 8th sack.
So close.
Yeah. It was so pretty to watch. Plenty of stuff to go over, plenty of show to mention. But before we start, just wanted to give a quick shout out to our listeners. Thank you so much for donating, for listening, for sharing the show, for helping make this be our most listened to month ever in the history of the show. We do have a new donor to mention real quick. We got a donation from Philip Bissell, who gives a nice little remark. Being a Vikings fan in Hawaii has been tough. It was even worse in the days before the internet. I've been listening to your podcast for more than a year. It's time to do my small part to repay you for the provided best Vikings content out there. Thank you so much, Philip. Thank you to our listeners who have helped out. You can donate to us through two different ways. You can go on patreon.com/Norse Code, and you can donate there. That's a monthly subscription. You can put up Tree Fitty. You can put up a buck if you'd like, just to help keep the lights on, keep the Loch Ness Monster at bay, and help us provide you with the best Vikings content out there. You can also go to paypal.me/Norse Code, and we will be happy to take a one-time donation there as well. So again, we're just trying to get out a bunch of content, trying to make the shows as good as we can, and just trying to keep this ad-free, shilling-free, so you guys don't have to worry about listening to terrible audio quality and all of these things. We like to provide a great show for you during the season twice a week. Even if James happens to forget an important part of his recording equipment and has to delay the recording for a day, we still like to try to get you guys 2 shows a week. So thanks for listening. Please share the show. If you hear value in our show, please help donate and help keep the lights on. So all of that being said, we're 3-0 and on top of the division still. Is there a defense out there that you would not want to play over the Vikings? Like, is there a defense that we feel is better than the current Viking squad, or is playing better than the current Viking squad?
It's really difficult for you to just be like, I think this defense is better, this defense is better, just because of how many opportunities the defense has created. I think there's like a couple of defenses that have been slightly more consistent against the opponents that they faced. I know, for example, the Philadelphia Eagles haven't played a bunch of amazing opponents, although the Steelers' offense is not, something to be trifled with. But they've played probably better down to down, but I don't think any defense is better about creating opportunities and balancing some of that consistency. I think if you took the Vikings defense from quarters 2 to 4, they're clearly the best defense in the NFL. I think that if they ironed out some of the stuff that happens in quarter 1 in all 3 of these last games, then it's not particularly close, and it approaches, maybe, sort of that historic territory, the 2013 Seahawks, 2015 Broncos sort of territory, which is interesting because between 2002 and 2013, for reasons that are sort of self-evident, we haven't had a historic defense in the NFL. We've had some pretty good ones, but 2013, 2015, and maybe the Vikings in 2016, depending on whether or not the defense can continue scoring, continue shutting down teams on third down, the Vikings are maybe approaching, historic levels of defense.
I was talking about on the Twitter feed that this defense might be able to eclipse the 2009 defense, which was just amazing to watch. We had the Williams wall. We had so much going on. We had corners that were able to shut it down. But man, this has been fun to watch. The Carolina game, not many people in the national media gave us a chance, and I've reached the point now of we're not giving up after the first quarter, because apparently we're just going to give up a couple of points in the first quarter, and then that's going to be it.
Yeah, that seems to be it. I think I think it's kind of like the Vikings are kind of baiting opponents or something. They're kind of feeling things out, then they kind of go in for the kill. They're not leading the league in points per drive. They're third in that, but they are leading the league in yards per play. They're definitely leading the league in defensive scores. I think they're leading the league in just takeaways.
And obviously, we are leading the league in sacks as well.
Yeah. And so in terms of impact plays, I don't think there's any better team right now than the Vikings. Obviously, it kind of remains to be seen. For example, two of their interceptions are kind of meaningless. Both of them by Trae Wayne, which is not a knock on Trae Wayne's abilities. I mean, he can't choose when he gets an interception. But at the end of the half with 7 seconds left, or an inaccurate pass, that would have been a
gift.
Yeah. Right, exactly.
Man, that's the type of and the reason why I've been pointing out this is that is the sort of interception the good teams make. Like, that's the sort of things that you want a good defense to be able to do. Not have it slip through the hands with something. Just grab it, end it, go to the end of the half. Just be done with it.
Yeah, no, for sure. But yeah, I mean, it's a super fun defense to watch. A bunch of really good defenses aren't like as fun to watch. I mean, obviously the Ravens and the Buccaneers defenses were like fun to watch, but I mean, the same years that Ravens defense, Tennessee Titans defense was arguably actually better. They had a worse offense. They didn't make it to the Super Bowl, but they weren't as fun to watch as that Ravens defense. I think that the Broncos defense is fun to watch. I think to some extent that 2013 Seattle defense is fun to watch, but some are not. Some of those good Steelers defenses not that fun to watch. This Vikings defense absolutely fun to watch, definitely explosive, and they're doing like you just said. Things that, those details that, good defenses should do, they're checking off those boxes, and then they're sort of exceeding expectations beyond that.
Yeah, we just need to... it's week 3. I feel like... or it's going into week 4 now, right? Yeah, it's going into week 4 now. So, I mean, we can just say without any sort of hesitation, this is a playoff team. We're winning the Super Bowl with this defense. It's going to be fantastic. No question about any of these things. Week 4 is all about blowing up all your expectations. Being no, we're fine. Unrealistic. Blah. This is all sustainable. No one is getting hurt. We are going to be just fine.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I think. I mean, we'll find out. Obviously, for real. As the season goes on, there's definitely sustainability concerns. I've got a bunch of tweets about the 538 article that was published by Chase Stewart, whose work I love and appreciate and follow, about the sustainability of the Vikings defense. And I don't think he actually wrote anything wrong, and people are really angry about what he wrote. And I've been writing the same thing for the past couple of weeks. With no one getting mad at me, so I think it's just kind of a national outlet.
You're just more lovable. Just admit that you're more lovable, and we can, you're just a nicer. it's part of that Minnesota nice. We're going to be nicer to somebody from the area as opposed to some talking head from New York or Los Angeles or wherever the hell he's at.
New York City.
City. They don't know anything about football in New York City.
Also, I mean, his headline was "They're in for a rude awakening," and mine have just been like, "I'm kind of worried, guys. Like, they're different."
I mean, like, I really wonder if this is, if the bus is actually on fire, guys. Like, there's a really good historical precedent of the Cardinals, like 2 years ago, guys. Can we? Oh, nope, we're in for a rude awakening. Screw that guy. So let's talk about the two big points coming out of the game, which were 8 sacks of Cam Newton and 23 net yards in the first 25 minutes of the second half. This defense shut it down.
Yeah, there's no question about that. It was stunning. And the thing is, it wasn't just, one player, doing one thing well and kind of taking over the game. Obviously, Everson Griffin had a phenomenal game, so not to take that away from him. I think he was sort of the best player on both sides of the field. But, 3 sacks from Everson Griffin, I think a sack from Brian Robinson. I have to say, there's so many sacks.
Robinson got a great sack in there.
Yeah.
And the safety.
Obviously, Danielle Hunter's safety. Yeah, Danielle Hunter's safety. Linval Joseph's sack. Harrison Smith, I think, got a sack too. Anthony Barr got a sack. Everybody. This was a sack party. Everybody who wanted one got one. And Cam Newton, he wanted to be able to run, and for the first quarter he was able to do a little bit of running. But as soon as Linval Joseph rolled up on on Cam Newton's ankle and he ended up going out for a play, he didn't try to run again for the rest of the game. Like, he was kind of just stuck in the pocket. And that might have been a combination of two things. Was it a combination of the potential for injury, like he was sore and didn't want to run, or was it just because his pocket was collapsing so quickly now? Yeah, I think it's a combination of a couple of things. I think one of them is that the routes that the Panthers were running were relatively slow developing. I think that, the Vikings displayed excellent coverage throughout. I was taking a look at some of all 22 pretty quickly. I don't usually break that down until, later tonight, but I was taking a look at that earlier today pretty quickly. And coverage plays, I think, a pretty big role in some of those sacks. I think the Danielle Hunter sack safety, for example, was definitely, sort of related to the coverage. I think one of Everson Griffin's sacks was related to the coverage. That plays a pretty big role. Obviously, the Vikings' talent that they have up front of that defensive line, which, I was holding myself back, or I wasn't saying I was holding myself back, but I didn't want to say that they were the best, defensive line in the NFL. I wanted to say that they were the deepest and that they have the best 8 deep in the NFL. Now it just seems like maybe it's the best in the NFL. That all plays a role. I mean, they were winning up front. They were able to shut down the run games. A lot of people think that that's pretty significant to sacks, and I think to the effect that it creates second and long and third and long situations where you can pin your ears back. It certainly did. But yeah, I think in terms of creating those sacks, I think that it was definitely a collective effort, not just from a dominant defensive line, but also from coverage and also, from, the ability to set up situations that enable pass rushing.
Now, Danielle Hunter's safety, that's the first one we've had in some time, isn't it?
Less long than a couple of people have been reporting. I know Pro Football Talk tweeted that was the first safety since 2001. Not true. The Orlovsky safety in 2011.
That's a pretty memorable safety.
Very memorable safety. I'm kind of surprised that that wasn't counted. My guess is if they may have run a query on players instead of teams, and I'm sure by some statistics organizations, Jared Allen is not credited for the Orlovsky safety, and so if you searched up by team players, there's no safety until 2001. But if you search it by team, there's obviously a safety right there in 2011. So it's been a while. It's been, I guess, 5 years since the safety, and 10 years before that. So. It was nice to see, especially because I think during Jared Allen's, record-breaking, almost record-breaking, whatever you want to call it, season, he was pretty close a lot of times. And it was really frustrating because there were times when he'd, get someone in the end zone, put up the safety sign, and the ref ruled it at no, the ball was probably at the half-inch line. Wait, come on.
Just give the dude a safety. He's already making the move. He's already making the motion. Let's just go with it. It's Jared Allen for F's sake. All right, so it starts with the safety. Danielle Hunter with a fantastic move. He ends up getting, and Newton looked like he was just holding onto the ball a little too long. Was that play just taking too long to develop, or what? Because he just looked like he was standing there with the ball for at least an extra second.
Yeah, no, he was holding onto the ball a little bit too long, and that has to do not just with the coverage that definitely obviously plays a role, but also the fact that the routes were just taking too long to develop. It was a 7-step drop with 2 hitches. And it just takes a while before the receiver can break. And then Cam Newton has to not just find a receiver that's breaking and wait for them to break before he can throw the ball, but they also have to be open. Beyond that, it looked like he had tunnel vision. I mean, normally he's pretty aware of the pocket. Despite his reputation, he's got pretty excellent pocket awareness, and he was just blinkered, right? You couldn't see that happening.
And it just because Collinsworth ends up saying a lot of things about he takes 4 seconds from snap to throw, 3 seconds. And that's the number you want. You hear Collinsworth say that a million times on a Sunday night. You end up watching a Sunday afternoon game, just kind of having the same thought, like, man, he's holding on. And that was my biggest reaction to, my biggest thought when I watched that safety was, wow, he's holding on to that a long time for hanging out in his own end zone with a defense that's just collapsing the pocket around him. It didn't make it looked like it didn't make any sense, but he was looking for something and he just didn't find it. He found the turf.
Yeah. He definitely looked like he was searching for some sort of salvation or something, for sure.
No salvation to be found here. So we took away Cam Newton's running. We took away the run game from them pretty quickly, and we took away Kelvin Benjamin. Kelvin Benjamin with 0 targets the entire game. Let's go to the question from Zen Cupid, who asks, did Rhodes shut down Benjamin, or did the pressure force Cam to not find him?
I think it was more the former. Okay, so Rhodes wasn't actually shadowing Benjamin for the entire game. He shadowed Benjamin for part of the game, and then Newman took him on some snaps. Even Captain Munnerlyn was in coverage against Kelvin Benjamin, which you think is just an auto target, right, if you've got that matchup. And they all performed really well. Trae Wayne also played against Kelvin Benjamin, did a really good job there too. They all performed really well, actually, and I think that pressure plays a role, but I think that at some point, the Panthers did start designing, or not designing, calling for shorter routes, and Benjamin just wasn't open. He did get 1 target in the fourth quarter. Marcus Sherels in coverage, somehow not a catch. I mean, that was there's probably a route miscommunication there too, but the fact that Marcus Sherels has a pass deflection against Kelvin freaking Benjamin and then had perfect coverage against Greg Olsen on the prior play is pretty stunning to me. But yeah, no, I think it's a great job by the secondary. I think the secondary deserves more credit for blanking Kelvin Benjamin than the pressure does, but I mean, I think clearly pressure plays a role.
I like that in the press conference that Ron Rivera and Cam Newton both just kind of went, yeah, I don't know what happened out there. I don't know how we missed Kelvin. He didn't get really? There was only the 1 target? Was that it? They both just seemed baffled that was even possible, that they could just forget about Kelvin.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that they didn't see that they hadn't targeted the receiver that had been, I think, before the game or before the week, was second in NFL receiving yards behind Stephon Diggs, or third. I think Marvin Jones was up there too. So I'm kind of surprised that they're like, oh, we didn't target Kelvin Benjamin once, literally our only receiver option. Because I mean, it's Ted Ginn, he's Ted Ginn. Bad with the good. Devin Funchess, who, according to Captain Munnerlyn, doesn't even have a name yet. Definitely not good. And then, yeah, I guess there's Greg Olsen, but among your receiver options, I mean, especially because Jonathan Stewart's gone. How's Kelvin Benjamin not a significant part of your game plan when your lead running back is gone? I guess you could say the same thing about Stephon Diggs and Adrian Peterson.
Yeah, they just seemed a little shell-shocked after the 4th or 5th sack, and maybe that was what did it. Let's talk about Trae Waynes for a moment and the leap that he's made over the last 2 games, or at least the 2 picks he's had over the last 2 games. Ted Harwood asks, is it just me, or has Trae Waynes made both of his interceptions with his eyes closed this year?
Yeah, I mean, I really don't want to take too much away from Trae Waynes, especially because, I'm kind of known as somebody who is not a huge fan of the Trae Waynes pick, so every time...
hater. You're a hater.
I'm a hater. But every time I criticize him, I always feel like in the back of my head, someone's going to just say, I'm hating just to hate. But both of his picks, I mean, they were thrown right to him. He didn't really undercut the ball like Terrence Newman did against Cam Newton, or the time he actually dropped that interception against Aaron Rodgers. Against Marcus Mariota, I think. Whatever, he dropped an interception by undercutting a route. He ended up undercutting a different route later against Cam Newton, getting an interception. It's not like that. It's, and he was in pretty good coverage on that second interception, but yeah, I mean, the ball was thrown right to him both times, so I don't want to it's good to have ball skills. Let's just leave it at that. Mackenzie Alexander knows that. Xavier Rhodes knows that. Chris Cook knows that. It's good to have ball skills. So, that's definitely an improvement. But, yeah, I'll be maybe a little bit more excited about his turnover production, which, 2 out of the last 3 games, not bad. But they both happened kind of in irrelevant situations. Because I think Trae Wayne's game-sealing interception happened on 3rd down, and I think, and I know this Cam Newton one happened with 7 seconds left. So, more impactful interceptions, ones that require maybe a little bit more in terms of cornerback skill and less in terms of quarterback error. That'd be pretty cool to see, but, at least he had a good game. There's no question that he had a good game after a pretty abysmal showing against Green Bay.
What is he doing better the last 2 games than he was before? Because there's just been it feels like there's been a slight leap in his play, or at least he seems like he's becoming a better corner over the last couple of games.
Yeah, I think really only this game, honestly, and I don't know if this is going to be an outlier or a sign of things to come. I know that for Xavier Rhodes, at one point, he just kind of turned on a switch. I think, his rookie year, I don't think he saw the field much. His sophomore year was really troublesome, tons of penalties. And then just near the end of his sophomore year, he just kind of turned a switch, and then the last 7 games, just boom, he was just a phenomenal player. I don't know if this is a time when Trae Wayne will turn a switch. I don't think it doesn't feel like that to me. I think this is likely more fluky, but the things that he's done better are, he's not getting blown off the ball at the snap. One of the critical things, and he still actually had some problems with this in the Carolina game. One of the critical things is that he's lining up when he's in off coverage. He's lining up at the right spot. Teams have been exploiting the underneath zone for Trae Wayne in a way that they don't for Terrence Newman or Xavier Rhodes as often, and for first downs. Because you don't necessarily want to discredit a cornerback for giving up a reception when they're in coverage for one that's 4 yards downfield and then they have to make the tackle. That's fine. That's what you're trying to force the offense into. But Trae Wayne is giving up receptions 7 yards downfield and he's still 3 yards upfield. And then you have to make a tackle and prevent a first down. So that's a big problem. And it seemed like that was less of a problem in the Carolina game. Still showed up. But yeah, he wasn't getting beaten up in press coverage, which, that was supposed to be a strength of Michigan State. It's glad to see that against teams whose receivers can definitively beat up cornerbacks, that he didn't get beat up there. He still has some trouble with inside breaking routes, but he's doing better in terms of technique and overcoming his agility issues. So those are the things that are playing a role. And then obviously, not as many penalties.
Not as many penalties. Let's talk about offense. I feel like the offense played. It didn't feel like they played for most of the first half, but they played. Let's talk about Bradford and Rudolph. I've said over the years that the biggest crutch for a bad quarterback or a new quarterback is the tight end, and man, they're doing some nice hooking up there.
770 and one touchdown. They're doing a pretty good job there. I think some of it is that Rudolph is genuinely playing better. I know that, and I had to get into an argument about this because of one freaking throw. But he's been adjusting well to the passes. I think that he's seeing the ball better. I don't know what it is. He's not dropping the ball when it hits his hands, which is nice. Obviously, he had a little bit of trouble with that in the first game, and I think maybe a little bit of trouble with that in the Green Bay game. He's been a little bit of a roller coaster, but he was more highs than lows in this game. He was even blocking well, too. The connection that Bradford and Rudolph are developing is really nice to see, and I think that, for a quarterback to come in new, one of the things that's really nice is a receiver with a large catch radius. And I always thought that Kyle Rudolph is appealing because it seems like he should have a large catch radius and very often displays what looks like a large catch radius, especially in the Christian Ponder era when he had to display a large catch radius, but very often had a limited reception rate compared to other tight ends that would be reeling in similar passes, and so his catch radius was always kind of deceiving because he'd make a highlight play and then drop an easy one. He's not really dropping the easy ones as much anymore, and so that catch radius is allowing him to adjust to some of the ball placement issues that Bradford's still having, adjusting to the timing of the offense, which is nice. We saw Stephon Diggs do a little bit of that, adjusting to the catch radius, and some of it was pretty excellent ball placement by Bradford in the Green Bay game. But yeah, that kind of chemistry, I think, is a result, not of necessity, but of comfort. That he's probably going to win his matchups because he's 6'5", You know that he isn't just tall; he has the ability to actually use that height to reel in stuff. It's good stuff.
It's really good to see, and it's really good to just see that we have something positive there. Our worry was when Bradford got in there that he might know the plays, but wouldn't be able to connect with the players, or wouldn't be able to get to Diggs or get to Rudolph. And Rudolph's been a nice little utility knife out there. He's been able to cut through and has been pretty useful. Especially on that touchdown. That was a really nice catch and a really nice throw.
Yeah, I don't know if it was actually a nice throw, honestly, and that's the issue that I was arguing on Twitter about, is that I thought actually the throw was pretty poor.
Are you arguing on Twitter again?
Yeah,
I thought the check mark meant that you couldn't be mean on Twitter anymore.
But I saw a bunch of people be mean during the debate last night with the check marks, so I figured.
Or just accuse candidates of being on cocaine. Yeah, I suppose.
Oh, I mean, that was lighthearted.
just like the cocaine. So we were. So the throw, you don't think was a good throw?
No, I don't think so. I think that Shaq Thompson was well out of position on the throw. Obviously, Rudolph's 6'5", Shaq Thompson's 6 feet tall, so there's some elements to the matchup that you want, but he throws it to the only area that Shaq Thompson would be able to conceivably contest it. If he throws it short to the inside or short to the outside, Rudolph's already in the end zone by the time the ball arrives, and the ball is definitely his. He has the ability to catch the ball to the touchdown without the ability of Shaq Thompson to catch it. And the biggest issue is the leverage of Shaq Thompson. He's already ahead of Rudolph, and he's not getting his head turned around, and he wouldn't be able to win against Rudolph, winning the inside leverage of that throw. Instead, he throws it long and over and into the bubble that Shaq Thompson actually has the ability to contest it. You see the catch. I mean, Rudolph's hands are right over Shaq Thompson. If Thompson is a little bit better about timing or turning around, he can get his hand on the ball and then he can contest it. So I thought it was actually a poor throw. You could take a look. It was a duck, I guess, but that's not really as important as the placement of velocity and timing. The timing was great. It was stellar, but the placement I thought was really poor. And that's actually one of the instances I wanted to point out that Rudolph is actually playing really, really well. And, that's a throw that, he maybe made his sophomore year, which I think was 2013. I don't know. The year that he got like 9 touchdowns. That's a play that he made then, but it's not a play that he had been making since. And so that's really nice to see.
Let's talk about the running game for a sec. How do you feel the combination of McKinnon and Asiata did with respect to that Carolina defense that was supposed to swallow us up whole?
I thought McKinnon actually did a good job. I mean, you take a look at the box score on his, yards per carry is really poor, something like 2.6, 2.8 or something like that. Better than, Peterson's 1.6, I suppose, but, by a whole yard. But if you take a look at the first 3 quarters, he was averaging over 5 yards a carry in the first 3 quarters. His success rate was 56%, which for context would be, over the course of a season, the highest success rate of 2015. I think 53% is maybe one of the higher success rates you'll see from an every down back. 43% is about average, and Adrian Peterson, a boom bust guy, was hitting around 40-ish%. And then, obviously in recent games, Peterson was doing poorly. So 56%, fantastic success rate. And that was over the first 3 quarters. He was doing a really good job. Then the final 6 runs of the game, which were happening in the fourth quarter and kill the clock mode, which, gives him some level of excuse. He produces 0 successes and his yards per carry drops to something, I think, in the negatives. I thought McKinnon had a good game. And I think that if you watch the game, without paying attention to the box score, I think that you would agree. And then when you look at the box score, you're kind of surprised at what happened. Not quite so for Matt Asiata. I think that he didn't do a very good job creating running lanes for himself, and I don't think he did a very good job, generating yards before or after contact. The thing I liked about McKinnon is that he's doing exactly what I was criticizing Peterson for not doing. You see a bunch of plays for Peterson where he's being met in the backfield and then gets tackled, and you're like, well, there's no room for him. And the argument is actually, if you're paying him $11 to $18 million a year, that on some of those plays, not all of them, not even necessarily most of them, but on some of those plays, he makes room either by powering through tackles or being agile enough to do some work. McKinnon did that. He got met in the backfield. He turned 4-yard loss into a 1-yard gain. He turned a 1-yard gain into a 4-yard gain. Things like that. So I think that from the perspective of the film, and I think that from the perspective of a particular view of the statistics, I thought he had actually a really good game. But it's not going to help him sort of in the box score until he gets more going.
I liked the meme, or the picture anyway, on Twitter that showed Jerick McKinnon about to do a run, and it showed Jon Snow at the Battle of the Bastards, where there was just where every person was about to come and attack him, and he just unsheathed his sword. It was like, all right, let's do this. I'm the only guy out here. You're all mine. Like, that was just so perfect. That after every time the line would just kind of break down a little bit and he's still in the backfield trying to make it through for 3 or 4 yards, just, nope, this is me. I got it. I will attempt to get back to the line of scrimmage anyway.
Right.
So there were a couple of good pictures on Twitter this week as well about showing the pocket that our O-line was giving Bradford. Should we... I guess my question is this something we should expect going forward? Because we actually had some protection for Bradford this game. It wasn't a lot of it. There were still a few sacks and a few hits, but this seemed like a better offensive line than the team that played Green Bay.
It was a better offensive line than the team that played Green Bay, both in run blocking and pass protection, but I still think it was actually a below average offensive line. There's just a difference between the first half and the second half, and I think the second half Bradford just got rid of the ball faster. I think, in Pro Football Focus log that, Bradford's under pressure for 40% of his snaps, which is an improvement over Green Bay. That was 48%. It was an improvement over, the 2015 season, which was 46%, but it's still actually in the bottom 5 in terms of offensive line pressure rate. Now, those pressures didn't necessarily turn into hits, and some of those hits didn't turn into sacks, so we didn't really see it as much, but it still has an impact on a player's play, which we definitely saw in the first half. Bradford went 4 for 11, 2.4 yards an attempt, and I think that the offensive line got kind of lucky at times, and I think that Bradford was able to neutralize some of the problems at times. I don't actually think that the offensive line performed very well. And there's a lot of stuff in this game I'm pushing back against, which kind of sucks because I think that the Vikings played really, really, really well in the game. But, a lot of the things that people are saying, I do fundamentally disagree with. I think that Bradford's ball placement was not that good in the game. I think that the offensive line was not that good in the game. And, those are things that people were talking about as reasons they were optimistic coming out of the game. And I don't think that they're necessarily true, but I get it. Especially because the broadcast really shapes our understanding of what's happening. And the broadcast kept on saying that Bradford kept on getting a bunch of time in the pocket, when really Bradford was creating his own, quote-unquote time in the pocket by getting rid of the ball faster, making sure that pressure didn't arrive. Andre Smith, predictably, that I don't think anyone disagrees with that. Andre Smith had a really bad game. Alex Boone, for like the 17 snaps that he was in, wasn't playing particularly well. We saw that on the McKinnon/Boone sack. Berger was playing fine. Fusco, I thought, was up and down, but I think he's better than people gave him credit for in that game. TJ Clemmings, I thought, actually played really poorly, and that's the point of disagreement I'm having with a lot of people. People thought that Clemmings played really well, and I understand it. His name wasn't called. But his 2 worst snaps, happened to be on sacks that he wasn't responsible for, but he gave up pressure almost immediately on those plays. And then he also gave up pressure on a couple of other plays, and then beyond that, he was maybe the worst run-blocking offensive lineman out of all of them, followed by Andre Smith. And so, interestingly, Sherels, one of the best offensive linemen, which is kind of weird. So I think that there's a lot of issues from the offensive line. You could say it's an improvement over the Green Bay game, and I think that you'd be accurate both in run-blocking and in pass protection. But I think that this to me is not a sign of optimism, especially because the Vikings got rid of the ball faster than they ever did, and pressure still arrived.
That is a good point. What people should do is just watch the game on mute with a small child taking a nap next to them and just see if they're able to do it. Like, this should be just your endurance test as a Vikings fan. Just try to watch the game silently like I had to on Sunday.
Right, exactly.
I managed to watch the entire game with a 3-year-old sleeping next to me for everything after the safety. So the return, for example, which we're about to get to, the touchdown, the constant destruction of Cam Newton, all of that was done in complete silence. And let me tell you, bit my tongue pretty hard. There was a lot of like a fist pump, immediately look down. All right, we're good. Another fist pump. Just try to survive it. This whole this having the kid over and having him take a nap during a Vikings game, a little difficult, a little more difficult than I was expecting to happen. So let's talk about Cordarrelle Patterson for just a moment. He was used on the offensive side, but that's not why people are talking about him this week. He was used as a gunner on a kick return, and I'm fairly confident he broke the land speed record on his way for the tackle. Is there a reason why we've never used him like that before?
I don't know. Like, what if he's been displaying poor tackle form in the limited opportunities in practice that he's had? Like, maybe that's it.
Couldn't he feasibly end up being a corner if we are looking at using him as a utility tool? Like, could he possibly end up being a corner? We don't need corners at the moment, but
I don't really hate that idea sort of in the abstract. I dislike the idea, partway through, a player's development curve, especially because he's finally growing. I think as a receiver. But if he was coming out and coming out of college right now, and you were like, maybe he's a corner, maybe he's a this, he's a that. I would definitely be open to that because he was such a raw receiver that you were just like, well, a position conversion is probably not going to hurt him too much over like trying to learn to continue to be a receiver, and we see that happen a lot with like less athletically capable players, like what was that guy from Michigan State, Tony Lippett, who I thought was actually a pretty interesting receiver prospect. So yeah, it's he could conceivably. I don't think he will.
It was a really good play, and he was untouched, so he just sped down there and just ripped him down to the ground, and it was just wow, that was a hell of a play by. Wait, is that 84? Really?
Yeah, no, it's fantastic, and he was two good plays. There's a phenomenal tackle, and then he also downed that punt inside like the 2, which, if I remember correctly, set up the safety. I'm not sure, but fantastic work on both plays.
Yeah, good job to Patterson. Not something we say often on the show, but good job to Patterson. Before we get into a negative, let's talk about Marcus Sherels for a moment. That was that was good. That was a hell of a little return he had there.
Yeah, that was a fantastic return. Obviously great blocking, but I thought that he demonstrated fantastic vision and patience, actually, especially in the early part of that return. And it's been nice to see because Marcus Sherels often doesn't get the reputation he deserves as a punt returner, not just among Vikings fans, but nationally. I think among Vikings fans, I think they kind of concede he's a good punt returner, but that's not worth it. And when I say Vikings fans, I don't mean like everybody, but like what the chatter has been over the past couple of years. And initially, I think that lack of recognition made sense, not because he was a walk-on or whatever, and a camp body, but because he was a safe returner, but he wasn't an explosive one. First couple of years, he didn't muff the ball. He returned it well. He did pretty well in terms of punt return average, but nothing, phenomenal. But the last 3 years, he's been in the top 3, I think. I probably have to double check this before I keep saying this because I've been saying this all day. But he's been in the top 3 in punt return average in the NFL for the past 3 years. In fact, I think one of those 3 years he was the number 1 in punt return average. And this is his 4th punt return touchdown. And so he's transitioned from like a pretty safe option as a punt returner to a really explosive option at punt returner. And sometimes you see athletes do the opposite, like Pac-Man Jones, although maybe he's not the best example because he just returned a punt for a touchdown. But yeah, you usually see an exciting athlete, learn more about when to be safe and when not to be safe, whereas, Sherels just figured out when to turn it on. So he's been fantastic. That was a great return. Also, good in coverage, I guess.
Just a random fun fact. Really good in coverage. Let's talk about Blair Walsh for a moment. since we got the touchdown, let's talk about the extra point. And, man, that's another missed one. And it directly, according to Coach Zimmer in the press conference, directly led the Vikings to go 4-2 on the next touchdown.
Yeah, that's not something you want to hear.
No, definitely not something you want to hear. Twitter question from SkullBlink182. What do you speculate is the dynamic of both Zim and Spielman's attitude toward Walsh's struggles?
That's a pretty good question because, it gets to sort of, what's the decision-making process when, like, a special teams player is failing. And I think that in terms of Walsh, I think that Spielman defers to Zimmer, and Zimmer defers in a lot to Prefer, who, not to be all insidery, but, people I've talked to have talked about how much latitude Prefer is given in these situations, and if he has faith in the guy, they're going to keep paying that faith back. And so it's going to take a lot before the organization overrides Prefer and moves forward. And the thing is, I may have talked about this at the beginning of the season too. We are overstating Walsh's struggles coming out of the end of last year, and I remember I was saying, hey, we're going to remember this game for the miss and not for some of the incredible stuff that Walsh did in the Seattle game, including making a lot of stuff that he shouldn't have made. The Vikings wouldn't have been in a position if he did not, before that last kick, outperform expectations for a kicker from those distances, even before taking into account stuff like the weather, which I think reduces average kick accuracy distance by about 5 yards. And so, he made like 49-yarder and a 53-yarder and, stuff that he consistently, you probably wouldn't expect a kicker to as consistently make them as he did. And he missed a 27-yarder. People are talking about him all off season. But then he did struggle in the preseason. And then he did struggle in that first game. And then he kind of came back in the second game. And then he missed another extra point. And I think that the body of work that we're drawing on when we talk about Walsh is different than the actual body of work that you should be concerned about. And if you think about it just like, well, he struggled for 3 games, well, then there's no reason to care, right? Or there's a reason to care, but there's no reason to be like, yeah, I don't know, man. I can't believe they're giving this kicker this much latitude. But if you're thinking about it, oh, he struggled all last year, but mostly because we remember the missed kick in the Seahawks game. Well, then obviously there's a long-term problem, and I think that our perceptions are a little wrong there too. So I think both play a role, but to answer the question directly, it's about Prefer. Indirectly, I think it's about sort of what the sample set we're looking at is.
Well, let's get to our questions. We've got a couple mailbag questions for you. First one's from @SorenHansen2, who asks the following: does the first 30 minutes of a game even matter anymore?
Evidence says no.
All evidence points to no. Next question from Vikings Haffy, who's got 2 of them here. He asks, how long until we have more offensive fumbles than defensive fumbles?
I'm really worried about this. And I put this in my advanced stats piece, which I'll put in the show notes. But I think that this is something that people aren't talking about too much. Like, let's say the Vikings continue to produce turnovers on defense at the same rate that they have, which is fairly unsustainable, but not entirely. Like, it's not impossible, nor is it out of the realm of possibility for good defenses to do this. Something like 40, defenses over the past, since the merger have done this. It's certainly possible the Vikings to be able to produce 43 turnovers in a season. The thing is, the Vikings are winning these games with a +3 or +2.7 turnover margin per game because they haven't caused any turnovers. And, that's pretty significant because turnovers swing things by about more than a score, because not only does it get rid of one of your scores, it gives them an opportunity to score. So these games that the Vikings are kind of eking out at the end are games that they would not necessarily be all that much in if they had a turnover. If the turnover margin is, instead of 2.7 is like 1.3, I don't think they win some of these games. And so, especially because some of the turnovers have directly led to points on the return for the turnover. And so that actually takes points off the board for the Vikings. But yeah, if the Vikings begin to turn it over, I think that that's going to present real problems in terms of the ability of the Vikings to sustain the level of success that they've had. And the real concern, I think, is fumbles. Bradford, over the past, actually, since he's entered the league, is if you count sacks plus runs as fumble opportunities, which is maybe not the friendliest way to put it, Bradford is the 6th most fumble-prone quarterback out of like the 40 or 50 quarterbacks that sort of meet has had 200 attempts or whatever. 6th or 7th most fumble-prone, and he's going to get sacked a lot behind this line. I don't think there's any question about that. Like, let's ignore, Bradford might get injured. He's going to get sacked a lot behind this line, and he's fumbled a lot historically in those situations. Beyond that, Jerick McKinnon's fumble rate in college is over twice the fumble rate of the most fumble-prone running backs in the NFL. I mean, they tend to fumble at around 2% of their carries. Jerick McKinnon fumbled at 4.3% of his carries. The average in the NFL is about 1.2%, 1.3% of your carries for a running back. And then the most that you'll have, I think Darren Sproles had the highest fumble rate in the NFL over the past 10 years. And that was around 3.2% or something like that. And Jerick McKinnon in college fumbled at a rate of over 4%, about 4.5% really. And he hasn't fumbled yet in the NFL, so that's obviously a good sign. But I think there's a lot of it's fair to be anxious about the likelihood of Jerick McKinnon fumbling the ball because of that. And there's a lot of stuff that's different. He's carrying the ball way different now than he did in college. That should play a pretty significant role. He was a quarterback in college, which means that he's likely to get sacked on those plays where he was passing the ball. Sacks cause way more fumbles than run attempts. Those are all important considerations too. But I mean, he has small hands. He's not used to ball security and stuff like that. And so there's the possibility that he could fumble too. I mean, Adrian Peterson is supposed to be super fumble prone, right? 2.1% of fumbles, less than half of Jerick McKinnon. So Jerick McKinnon in college. So there's reasons to be concerned about the Vikings offense suddenly producing fumbles and then not being able to recover them. Who knows?
So our next question from Haffy asks, I hear a lot about our cornerbacks and a hype train about the defensive line, but how's the linebacker core doing overall?
Pretty well. I was maybe a little bit too harsh on them in my initial game recap because I thought that Kendricks and Barr played poorly. I think PFF still overrates Kendricks' game. They gave him an 80+. But Barr is playing extremely well. Very, very well. He's filling in run gaps and he's creating lane discipline. He's grabbing tackles for loss. He's generating pressure. He's pretty good in coverage. And you're not seeing him because teams are running away from him or running backs are running away from him because he's filling the lane and performing his roles as a linebacker, filling spot duty. On the plays where it's obvious, what his assignment is, he's had some troubles. He had some trouble in the game. He missed at least 2 tackles, which I think is a pretty significant part of the problem in his game. And he had some issues in coverage. Kendricks had more issues in coverage. But he was a tackle magnet. I'm going to say that he was actually not that relevant on most of the tackles. Most of the time he was credited with a tackle. Someone else got to the ball. But I think in this game I was underrepresenting his ability to make sure that he got to the ball carrier behind the line of scrimmage or for a loss. So that was pretty good. Chad Greenway played 27 snaps in part because Carolina was playing a heavier package because they wanted to run the ball and they're used to running out of heavy packages, not as many 3-receiver sets, and in part because Eric Kendricks was injured for a little bit. He had a phenomenal game. He's had 3 good games. And so there goes my brand.
Nope. Your brain's just going to check out for the rest of the season. As it turns out, Chad Greenway is having a pretty good season. It's hard to process that. Let's go to our next question, which is from Lightning Dustin, who asks, is Johnson not involved because he's not getting open, or is Sam Bradford just finding a receiver earlier in the progression?
It's a little bit of everything. I think that some of it is outside of his control because the progression is dictated by the coverage, and the coverage it dictates the route. So on one side you might have a zone beater, on one side you have a man beater, and maybe, and a lot of times Johnson is sort of on the wrong end of that. Against man coverage, he's got the zone beater, and that's not going to work out too well. Some of it is that his routes are designed to get others open. and he's doing that well, which is one reason that Treadwell's not seeing the field. Some of it is that he's not a super trustworthy target. So if you've got two receivers that are open as a result of the coverage because of the defense that you've read, instead of like the keys that you've read, you're probably going to throw it to someone else. And some of it is that he's not getting open on a ton of snaps, even though he's getting open probably about as much as you want a receiver to get open, because he's not that reliable and because he's very often not the first receiver in the progression, which relates to the question. If he's only getting open at an average rate, and quarterbacks will maybe sometimes want to decline that if they think someone else is going to be open on the same play at the same time, then yeah, he's not getting a bunch of targets and he's not getting a bunch of catches.
Next question is from the Real Dustbin, who asks, what should the starting O-line look like next Monday?
I mean, I've got these crazy ideas. And my idea now, because I've been talking with Matthew Collar with 1500 ESPN, and we've been talking about different ways to shuffle the O-line, and the preface here is that the Vikings absolutely need to be creative in solving this offensive line problem. I mean, they're giving up pressure at a rate of between 48 and 40% over the past couple of games. And some things aren't working. Boone so far isn't working. I expect that to bounce back. Andre Smith so far isn't working. I do not expect that to bounce back because Boone has played well in the recent past. Smith has not. And so I think there's less faith in that. Fusco's already improving, which is nice. So I don't think you have to mess with him. Berger's already playing well. So you have to figure out the left tackle position. Matt Cluel's on IR. Is it TJ Clemmings? Is it Jeremiah Sherels? Whatever. I think a creative solution, which, I've mentioned before, so it's going to sound old hat to people who keep listening to words that I say, is to move Boone out to left tackle, promote, one of the guards, Zach Kieran, or Jeremiah Sherels, who played really well. Probably, in my head right now, it's Sherels. Make him the left guard, because he played well for one game there. Again, you have to be creative and take some risks. And then move TJ Clemmings to right tackle, which, shades of 2015, where TJ Clemmings was the worst or second worst offensive tackle in the NFL, including tackles who only played 8 or 4 games. He's playing better than Andre Smith, and I don't think it's a left tackle, right tackle thing. I don't think he's a more natural left tackle than a right tackle. In fact, I think his footwork is so raw that it would help him a little bit more at right tackle because that's a little bit more what he's used to. But he's already playing a little bit better than Andre Smith, and I think that, people ask me, has TJ Clemmings improved? Has he improved in camp? Has he improved in the preseason? And I kept on saying, yes, he's improved, but he's still bad because he had a lot to improve from. He wasn't in the basement. He was like in a storm cellar below the basement. He's just kind of climbing his way out. But Andre Smith is where TJ Clemmings was last year, which is astounding to me because Andre Smith has an extraordinary amount of experience. 3-year starter at Alabama, has been in the league since, I think, Phil Loto, I think they entered the same draft, so since 2009. So 7 years, 10 years at offensive tackle. And he's playing as poorly as a dude who only played for 2 years and then had to start in the NFL. So you move TJ Clemmings to the other side. He's got room to improve. He's already improved a little bit, and I think that shores up some of the protection problems. And I just came off of a rant saying TJ Clemmings didn't have as good of a game as people are saying. That's fine. He had a below-average game. That's better than what Andre Smith did. So you keep Bergeron at center. He seems to be friggin' phenomenal there. Fusco is already improving at right guard. You move Clemmings to right tackle, where you can expect maybe a marginal improvement. Again, you have to roll the dice because you have to take chances to protect Bradford and prevent fumbles and prevent injuries. Keep Sherels a left guard. He played well there. Boone, I think, is a natural left tackle who's been playing left guard for most of his life. Put him at left tackle.
Final question for the show is from Tommy Gunn, who asks, last week the Packers beat Green Bay. This week, the protests beat the Panthers. How lucky are the Vikings to just show up and win?
Yeah, I think, I'm kind of sick of that narrative too, but I think after the Panthers game, it was less a common theme. I mean, I think Stephen A. Smith said that the protests beat the Panthers, which is the most absurd thing I've ever heard. But not many national commentators took the credit away from the Vikings for the Panthers win. And I don't know, I feel like as Vikings fans in general, we look for reasons to be like offended by the national coverage.
Or we're just not used to the national coverage existing, to be honest.
Yeah, no, that's part of it too. I mean, in 2009, you couldn't deny that the Vikings were the reason that they were winning, and so it's a different tone of coverage. And the Vikings, I'm not going to say they came out of nowhere. They were like everyone's dark horse, right? Like everyone was like, well, watch out for this Vikings team. I think they're underrated. And of course, if everyone says the team is underrated, they're probably not. But, they burst onto the scene, and I think some people were right to question what's happening with Rodgers. And I think that there's a lot of people talking about how the Packers beat themselves. And I think that that's frustrating as a Vikings fan. But I think that we're overrepresenting the amount of media that said that at the time. And I think that there's not very much media at the time right now that are discrediting the Vikings for their win. Vikings are ranking 4th and 3rd in a bunch of national power rankings, depending on what I have a philosophy of power rankings, which is a stupid thing to say, but I've been writing about sports for years, so how could you not have a philosophy of power rankings? But if your philosophy about power rankings is that your power rankings should only reflect how a team has performed, and I think this is Judd Zulgat's theory of power rankings. So it's like win-loss and which wins were better and which losses were worse sort of thing. Like basically like college, rankings, which I think that's how college rankings should work. Then the Vikings are very clearly a top 5 team. I think they're actually a top 2 team because they've had the Panthers and the Packers as their opponents, as their difficult opponents, and not many undefeated teams have done that. Difficult to take the Patriots away from number 1. But if you're talking about the going forward, what we can predict from the Vikings, then I think that 3 overrates the Vikings. And I hate saying that because I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I think that the Vikings are playing like a top 10 team, which is not an insult, especially given that last year that was an open question. Are they a top 10 team? Well, they kind of lucked into the record, or, whatever, right? I think they're clearly a top 10 team that is bound to take some licks as a result of some very clear deficiencies they have. So I think that there's less of it than we're saying there is. And the sheer absurdity of the statement about the protests defeating the Panthers, I think, puts it into focus, too.
I just can't wait for Tuesday morning to see the headline on ESPN, "What's wrong with the Giants?" Like, I'm just waiting for it at this point. Just waiting for some big diatribe on how Eli's over the hill, which I think...
Eli Manning threw an interception. What's wrong with him?
I know, right?
It might be Eli.
I'm just looking forward to the same piece they recycle from the last 7 years of... is Eli okay? What's wrong with the Giants for like the early part of the season? Just every year, folks. Look it up on ESPN. Every year there's an article about Eli Manning just struggling in the beginning of the season, and is this the year that the Giants should get rid of Eli? And then they sign him to an extension, and that's just not even a question anymore. So now that you're Debbie Downer and I'm ripping on Eli Manning, I think we can be done with the show.
Yeah, I mean, we've jinxed the team enough for next week, so I think we've accomplished our goal.
I'm glad that we pulled this off. Well, that is going to be it for this show. We're going to have our Giants preview a little later in the week, so look forward to that. If you hear value, if you like what you've heard, you can donate to the show in one of 2 different ways. You can do it at paypal.me/Norse Code, or you can go to patreon.com/Norse Code and donate through there. It's a monthly payment plan. You can just donate $1. You can donate $3.50. You can donate $5. Whatever you feel you have, whatever you would like to give to us to help keep the show going, to keep the lights on, to keep us ad free. Just if you hear value, give us $1 or $2. Just help us out a little bit. And Arif, anything you would like to plug before we are done with the show?
I've got the advanced stats piece up at 1500 ESPN. I've got my initial game reactions, which again, I've walked back my opinion of the linebackers a little bit over at coldomaha.com. I'll have another piece on the offensive line specifically at 1500 very soon. And then, of course, I'll have some sort of player deep dive at Cold Omaha soon. I already did one on Stephon Diggs. I did one on Linval Joseph. And they had even better games after I did it than before I did it. So... we'll see which player I cover and whether or not they'll have an even better game.
So, your next piece is going to be on Chad Greenway. Is that what's happening?
He cannot be playing any better than he's playing right now. I'm not going to screw myself that much.
All right. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, you can do so at Norse Code DN. You can follow Arif at Arifasan NFL. He's got that lovely blue check mark. You can follow Dusty at Dusty O'Connell. He'll be on the next show. And you can follow myself at Big Mono, although I also do the Norse Code DN Twitter account. You can go to NorseCodePodcast.com and look at all of our episodes along with the Daily Norseman as well. That is going to be it. So, for Arif, for Dusty, my name is James. Thank you so much for listening, and our formula is this. Spoons out! And we'll see you with the Giants preview.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.